Hi there, and welcome back to At the Table. If you're just here for the audiobook, no problem. Feel free to use the chapters within the video. You'll find that chapter 2 takes you right to the top of the book, and each of the scenes has been broken out into its own chapter. So if you're coming back to finish off your experience, just click where you left off, and you'll be good to go. And if you're new to At the Table, hello, my name is Christopher. I am Flannel and Pearls, your local neighborhood knitting friend, and I want to welcome you in. This is a space for friends. This is a place where makers from all over the world gather together, they bring their projects to the table, and we decide that this is a time we're going to focus on ourselves. This is a time when we shut off the chaos of the outside world. We're going to leave all that craziness out there. That is for them, and this is for us. It doesn't matter what your project is. It doesn't matter what you bring to the table. You could knit, crochet, embroider, cross stitch. You could be spinning wool, picking wool. You could be sketching, sculpting. You could even just be here to listen. What matters is that you're here and that you matter and that you are giving yourself what you need to fill up your own cup and be the best version of you. Now, what I'm going to be working on today is I'm going to show you how I made this infinity scarf. This is a little mosaic colorwork knit scarf that I made out of a big old pile of unprocessed wool. And most of the wool I washed myself. There were a couple of instances where I didn't have the colors that I needed, and so a couple of friends stepped in and helped out. Big thanks to Melissa at Melly Knits for providing the merino, and my friends over at Hearthside Fibers for giving me the black and the white alpaca. Huge thank you. I appreciate that. This is made out of 4 different yarns. There are 4 different yarns within inside of this scarf. Each of them is made out of a medium wool, a long wool, and an alpaca, and is based off of one of the 4 main characters from Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, working into each of the fibers, the characteristics and colors of those characters. So, without much ado, if you aren't familiar, go ahead and pause the video now. Maybe you didn't show up with your project in hand. Maybe you weren't ready. You were caught off guard. That's all right. Feel free to pause the video here. Go get your project, whatever it might be. Get a blanket. Wrap those toes up in a nice warm pair of socks. Maybe get a cup of cocoa or coffee. Maybe a little bit of tea. And settle in and join me for A Christmas Carol. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, abridged and edited for modern audiences. Read aloud by Christopher Lewis. Section 1. Scrooge and Marley. Marley was dead, to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was as good a seal of legitimacy if ever there was one. With his name on the registry, one thing was certain. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know, of my knowledge, what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined myself to regard a coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade, but the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hands shall not disturb it. You will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Let it be known that Scrooge, too, knew him to be dead. In fact, Scrooge was certain of it. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years, and Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole friend, and sole mourner. The odd thing is, he never painted out old Marley's name on their business. There it stood years afterward, right there above the warehouse door. Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley, and sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge, and sometimes they called him Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted, hand-to-the-grindstone Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. hard and sharp as a flint from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained and as solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head, and on his eyebrows, and on his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office and the dog days, and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, no wintry weather chill him. No wind that blew was bitterer than he, no falling snow was more intent upon its purpose, no pelting rain less open to entreaty. Foul weather didn't know where to have him. The heaviest rain and snow and hail and sleet could boast of the advantage over him in only one respect. They often came down handsomely, and Scrooge never did. Nobody ever stopped him on the street to say, with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come see me next?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what time it was. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such a place. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming, they would tug their owners into doorways and wag their tails as though to say, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, Dark Master." But what did Scrooge care? That was the thing he liked. To edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. But once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. Ooh, it was cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy withal, and he could hear the people in the court outside go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breasts and stamping their feet on the cold pavement stones to warm them. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. It had not been light all day, and the candles were flaring in the windows of the neighboring offices like ruddy smears upon the palpable brown air. The fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole and was so dense that although the court was of the narrowest, the houses opposite were mere phantoms. To see the dingy cloud come drooping down, obscuring everything, one might have thought that nature lived hard by and was brewing on a large scale. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open so that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who, in a dismal little cell beyond, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like only 1 coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, and as so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for him to find a new position. Wherefore the clerk put on his white scarf and tried to warm himself at the candle. In which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" He had so heated himself with the rapid walking in the fog and frost, this nephew of Scrooge's, that he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome, his eyes sparkled, and his breath smoked. "Christmas a humbug, Uncle," said Scrooge's nephew. "You don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do," said Scrooge. "Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come then," returned the nephew gaily. "What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough." Scrooge, having no better answer ready at the spur of the moment, said, "Bah!" again, and followed it up with "humbug," for good measure. "Don't be cross, Uncle," said the nephew. "What else can I be?" returned the uncle. "When I live in such a world of fools as this, Merry Christmas. Out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time but a time of paying bills without money, a time of finding yourself a year older but not an hour richer? If I could work my will," said Scrooge indignantly, "every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart." Uncle, pleaded the nephew. Nephew, returned the uncle sternly, keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine. Keep it? Repeated Scrooge's nephew. But you don't keep it. Let me leave it alone then, said Scrooge. Much good may it do you, much good it has ever done you. There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say, returned the nephew. Christmas among the rest, but I am sure that I have always thought of Christmas as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time that I know of, in the long calendar of the year, when men and women seem to open their shut-up hearts freely, and to think of people below them as if they were really just fellow passengers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say, God bless it. The clerk involuntarily applauded, and then, becoming immediately sensible of the impropriety, he poked the fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever. Let me hear another sound from you, said Scrooge, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. He added, turning to his nephew, You're quite a powerful speaker, sir. I wonder you don't go into Parliament. Don't be angry, uncle. Come. Dine with us tomorrow. Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, indeed he did. He went the whole length of the expression and said that he would see him in that extremity first. But why? Cried Scrooge's nephew. Why? Why did you get married? Said Scrooge. Because I fell in love. Because you fell in love, growled Scrooge, as if it were the only thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. Good afternoon. Nay, uncle, but you never came to see me before that happened. Why give that as a reason for not coming now? Good afternoon, said Scrooge. I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why can't we be friends? Good afternoon, said Scrooge. I am sorry with all of my heart to find you so resolute. We have never had any quarrel to which I have been a party, but I have made an attempt in the honor of Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So, a Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon, said Scrooge. And a Happy New Year. Good afternoon, said Scrooge. And his nephew left the room without an angry word. He stopped at the outer door to bestow the greetings of the season on the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially. There's another fellow, muttered Scrooge, who overheard him. My clerk, with 15 shillings a week and a wife and a family, talking about a Merry Christmas. I'll retire to Bedlam. This lunatic, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands and bowed to him. Scrooge and Marley's, I believe, said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years, Scrooge replied. He died 7 years ago this very night. We have no doubt that his liberality will be well represented in his surviving partner, said the gentleman, presenting his credentials. It certainly was, for they had been 2 kindred spirits. At the ominous word liberality, Scrooge frowned, and he shook his head and handed the credentials back. At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, said the gentleman, taking up a pen, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessities. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir. Are there no prisons? Asked Scrooge. Plenty of prisons, said the gentleman, laying down the pen again. And the union workhouses? Demanded Scrooge. Are they still in operation? They are, returned the gentleman. Still, I wish I could say that they were not. The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigor, then? Said Scrooge. Both very busy, sir. I was afraid from what you had said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course, said Scrooge. I'm very glad to hear it. Under the impression that they scarcely provide care of mind or body to the multitude, returned the gentleman. A few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall I put you down for?" "Nothing," Scrooge replied. "You wish to remain anonymous?" "My wish to be left alone," said Scrooge. "Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I have mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there." "Many can't go there, and many would rather die." "If they would rather die," said Scrooge, "they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Good afternoon, gentlemen." And with that, Scrooge flung the door of his counting-house open, ushering the men to leave. In the darkening afternoon, the fog was so thick that people ran about with flaming torches, offering their services to go before horses and carriages, lighting their paths. The ancient tower of a church, whose gruff old bell was always peeping slyly down at Scrooge out of a Gothic window in the wall, became invisible and struck the hours and quarters in the clouds, with tremulous vibrations afterward as if its teeth were chattering in its frozen head. The cold became intense. As the portly men scrambled from Scrooge and Marley's doorstep, they nearly tripped over a young boy perched beneath them, gnawed and mumbled by the hungry cold as bones are gnawed by dogs. The boy opened his mouth to regale the gentleman with a Christmas carol. But at the first sound of "God bless you, merry gentlemen, may nothing you dismay," Scrooge seized his cane with such energy of action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the doorstep to the fog and even more to the thickening frost. At length, the hour of shutting up the counting-house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tacitly admitted this fact to the expectant clerk, who instantly snuffed out his candle and put on his hat. "You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose," said Scrooge. "If quite convenient, sir." "It is not convenient," said Scrooge, "and it is not fair. If I were to reduce your pay by half-a-crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used." The clerk smiled faintly. "And yet," said Scrooge, "you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work." The clerk observed that it was only once a year. "A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December," said Scrooge, buttoning his greatcoat up to the chin. "But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier the next morning." The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white scarf dangling below his waist, for he wore no heavy coat, ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could pelt. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner, and they were a gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile of building up a yard where it had so little business to be that one could scarcely help fancying it must have run up there when it was a young house, playing hide-and-seek with the other houses, and forgotten the way out again. It was old enough now, and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large, and it is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since the last mention of his late partner that afternoon. And then, let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, not a knocker, but Marley's face. It was not shrouded in impenetrable shadow as the other objects in the yard were, but it had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred as if by breath or hot air, and though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. That and its livid color made it horrible, but its horror seemed to be in spite of the face and beyond its control, rather than a part of its own expression. As Scrooge looked fixedly on this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation would be untrue, but he put his hand upon the key that he had relinquished, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle. He did pause with a moment's irresolution before he shut the door, and he did look cautiously behind it as if he half expected to be terrified by the sight of Marley's pigtail sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door, except the screws and nuts that held the knocker in. So he said, "Bah!" and closed it with a bang. The sound echoed through the house like thunder. Every room above and every cask in the wine merchant cellars below appeared to have a separate peal of its own. Scrooge, however, was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall, moving up the stairs, trimming his candle absent-mindedly as he went. But, for good measure, regardless of his confidence, he took the time to inspect each room thoroughly for any irregularity. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, a small fire in the grate, spoon and basin at the ready, and a little saucepan of gruel upon the hob. Nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Lumber room as usual. Old fire guard, old shoes, 2 fish baskets, washing stand on 3 legs, and a poker. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in. Double locked himself in, which was not his custom. He had just enough recollection of Marley's face to desire to do that. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap, and he sat down before the fire to eat his gruel. It was a low fire indeed, next to nothing for such a bitter night. He was obliged to sit close to it and brood over it before he could extract the least sensation of warmth from such a meager handful of fuel. The fireplace was an old one, built by some Dutch merchant long ago and paved all around with quaint Dutch tiles designed to illustrate the scriptures. There were Cains and Abels, Pharaoh's daughters, queens of Sheba, angelic messengers descending through the air on clouds like featherbeds. Abrahams, Belshazzars, apostles putting off to sea in butter boats, hundreds of figures to attract his thoughts. And yet, that face of Marley, 7 years dead, came like an ancient prophet's rod and swallowed up the whole. If each smooth tile had been a blank at first, with power to shape some picture on its surface from the disjointed fragments of his thoughts, there would have been a copy of old Marley's head on every one. "Humbug," said Scrooge, and walked across the room. After several turns, he sat down again, and as he rested his head back in the chair, his glance happened to land upon a bell, a disused bell that hung in the room and communicated for some purpose now forgotten with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment, and with a strange, inexplicable dread, that as he looked, he saw this bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This might have lasted half a minute, but it seemed like an hour, and then the bells ceased as they had begun altogether. They were succeeded by a clanking noise, deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain across the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard that ghosts in haunted houses were described as dragging chains, and his heart quickened. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise of chains much louder on the floors below. Then coming up the stairs, then coming straight toward his door. "It's a humbug still," said Scrooge. "I won't believe it." The same face. The very same. Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights and boots, the tassels on the latter bristling like his pigtail, and his coat skirts, and the hair upon his head. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on his coat behind. Though he looked the phantom through and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes and marked the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about its head and chin, he was still incredulous and fought against his senses. "How now?" said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?"
Much.
Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?"
Ask me who I was.
"Who were you then?" asked Scrooge, raising his voice.
In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley.
Can you sit down?" said Scrooge, looking doubtfully at him.
I can.
"Do it, then." Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that in the event of it being impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. But the ghost sat on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it.
You don't believe in me,
observed the ghost. "I don't," said Scrooge.
Why do you doubt your senses?
"Because," said Scrooge, "a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. Yes, there's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are." Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart by any means waggish then. The truth is, he tried to be smart as a means of distracting his own attention, and by keeping down his terror, for the specter's voice disturbed the very marrow of his bones. To sit staring at those fixed, glazed eyes in silence would play, Scrooge felt, the very deuce with him. There was something very awful, too, in the specter's being provided with an infernal atmosphere of its own. Scrooge could not feel it himself, but this was clearly the case, for though the ghost sat perfectly motionless, its hair and skirts and tassels were still agitated as if by the hot vapor from an oven. "You see this toothpick?" said Scrooge, returning quickly to the charge and wishing, if only for a second, to divert the vision's stony gaze from himself.
I do,
replied the ghost. "You are not looking at it," said Scrooge.
But I see it,
said the ghost.
Notwithstanding.
"Well," returned Scrooge, "I have but to swallow this, and for the rest of my days be persecuted by a legion of goblins, all my own creation. Humbug, I tell you, humbug!" At this, the spirit raised a frightful cry and shook its chains with such a dismal and appalling noise that Scrooge held on tight to his chair to save himself from falling. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage round its head as if it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped down to its breast. Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hands before his face. "Mercy," he said, "dreadful apparition, what do you want from me?"
Man of the worldly mind,
replied the ghost.
Do you believe in me or not?
"I do," said Scrooge. "I must, but why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?"
It is required of every man,
the ghost returned,
that every spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men, and travel far and wide, and if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth, and turned to happiness.
Again the spectre raised a cry and shook its chain and wrung its shadowy hands. "You are fetid," said Scrooge, trembling. "Tell me why."
I wear the chain I forged in life,
replied the ghost.
I made it, link by link, and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you?
Scrooge trembled more and more.
Or would you know,
pursued the ghost,
the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was as full and as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain.
Scrooge glanced about him on the floor in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing. "Jacob," he said imploringly, "old Jacob Marley, speak comfort to me."
I have none to give,
the ghost replied.
It comes from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge, and is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men. Nor can I tell you what I would. A very little more is all permitted to me. I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me, in life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole. And weary journeys lie before me.
It was a habit with Scrooge whenever he became thoughtful to put his hands in his breeches pockets. Pondering on what the ghost had said, he did so now, but without lifting his eyes or getting off of his knees. "You must have been very slow about it, Jacob," Scrooge observed in a businesslike manner, though with humility and deference.
"Slow,"
the ghost repeated. 7 years dead," mused Scrooge. "Been traveling all the time."
"The whole time,"
said the ghost.
"No rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse."
"But you were always a good man of business, Jacob," faltered Scrooge, who now began to apply this to himself.
"Business!"
cried the ghost, wringing its hands again.
"Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business."
It held up its chain at arm's length as if that were the cause of all of its unavailing grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground again. Scrooge was very much dismayed to hear the spectre going on at this rate, and began to quake exceedingly.
"Hear me. My time is nearly gone,"
cried the ghost.
"I am here tonight to warn you that you may yet have a chance and hope of escaping my fate. A chance and a hope of my procuring Ebenezer."
"You were always a good friend to me," said Scrooge. "Thank you."
"You will be haunted,"
resumed the ghost,
"by 3 spirits."
Scrooge's countenance fell almost as low as the ghost's had done. "Is that the chance and hope you had mentioned, Jacob?" he demanded in a faltering voice.
"It is."
I think I'd rather not," said Scrooge.
"Without their visits,"
said the ghost,
"you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow, when the bell tolls 1.
"Couldn't I take them all at once and have it over with, Jacob?" hinted Scrooge.
Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that for your own sake you remember what has passed between us."
When it had said these words, the spectre took its wrapper from the table and bound it around its head as before. Though his eyes were fixed on the floor in front of him, Scrooge knew this by the smart sound the teeth made when the jaws were brought together by the bandage. He ventured to raise his eyes again, and found his supernatural visitor confronting him with its chains wound over and about its arms. The apparition walked backward from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the spectre reached it, it was wide open. It beckoned Scrooge to approach, which he did, and when they were within 2 paces of each other, Marley's ghost held up its hand, warning him to come no nearer. Scrooge stopped, not so much in obedience as in surprise and fear, for on the raising of the hand he became sensible of a confused noise in the air. incoherent sounds of lamentation and regret, wailings inexpressibly sorrowful and self-accusatory. The spectre, after listening for a moment, joined in the mournful dirge and floated out upon the bleak, dark night. Scrooge followed to the window, desperate in his curiosity. He looked out. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste and moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. Some few were linked together, mutually cursed in their fate. None were free. Many had been personally known to Scrooge in their lives. He had been quite familiar with one old ghost in a white waistcoat with a monstrous iron safe attached to its ankle, who cried piteously at being unable to assist a wretched woman with an infant whom it saw below upon a doorstep. The misery with them was all clearly that they sought to interfere for good in human matters, but had lost that power forever. Whether these creatures faded into mist or mist enshrouded them, he could not tell. But they and their spirit voices faded together, and the night became as it had been when he walked home. Section 2. The First Spirit. When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of bed, he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. He was endeavoring to pierce the dark with his ferret eyes when the chimes of a neighboring church struck the 4 quarters. So he listened for the hour. To his great astonishment, the heavy bell went on from 6 to 7, and from 7 to 8, and regularly up to 12, then stopped. 12! It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong, and Icicle must have got into the works. 12! He touched the spring of his repeater to correct this most preposterous clock. Its rapid little pulse beat 12 and stopped. "Why, this isn't possible," said Scrooge, "that I can have slept through a whole day and far into another night. It isn't possible that anything has happened to the sun, and this is 12 at noon." The idea being an alarming one, he scrambled out of bed and groped his way to the window. He was obliged to rub the frost off with the sleeve of his dressing gown before he could see anything, and could see very little then. All he could make out was that it was still very foggy and extremely cold, and that there was no noise of people running to and fro, making a great stir, as there unquestionably would have been if night had beaten off bright day and taken possession of the world. Scrooge went to bed again and thought and thought and thought it over and over and over, and could make nothing of it. The more he thought, the more perplexed he was, and the more he endeavored not to think, the more he thought. Marley's ghost bothered him exceedingly. Every time he resolved within himself, after mature inquiry, that it was all a dream, his mind flew back again, like a strong spring released, to its first position, and presented the same problem to be worked all through. Was it a dream or not? Scrooge lay in this state until the chime had gone 3 quarters more, when he remembered all of a sudden that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. He resolved to lie awake until the hour had passed, and, considering that he could no more go to sleep than go to heaven, this was perhaps the wisest resolution in his power. The quarter was so long that he was more than once convinced that he must have sunk into a doze unconsciously, and missed the clock. At length, it broke upon his listening ear. Ding, dong. "A quarter past," said Scrooge, counting. Ding, dong. "Half past," said Scrooge. Ding, dong. "A quarter to it," said Scrooge. Ding, dong. "The hour itself," said Scrooge triumphantly, "and nothing else." He spoke before the hour bell sounded, which it did now in a deep, dull, hollow 1. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, I tell you, by hand. Not the curtains at his feet, nor the curtains at his back, but those to which his face was addressed. And Scrooge, starting up in a half-recumbent position, found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from view and being diminished back into a child's proportions. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if from age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle on it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. The arms were very long and muscular, the hands the same, as if its grip was of uncommon strength. Its legs and feet, most delicately formed, were, like its arms, bare. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and around its waist was bound a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and, in a singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, by which all of this was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of its using, in its duller moments, a great extinguisher for a cap, which it now held under its arm. Even this, though, when Scrooge looked at it with increasing steadiness, was not its strangest quality. For as its belt sparkled and glittered now in one part and now in another, and what was light one instant at another time was dark, so the figure itself fluctuated in distinctness, being now a thing with one arm, now with one leg, now with 20 legs, now a pair of legs without a head, now a head without a body, of which dissolving parts no outline would be visible in the dense gloom wherein they melted away. And in the very wonder of this, it would be itself again, distinct and clear as ever. "Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?" asked Scrooge. "I am." The voice was so soft and gentle, singularly low, as if instead of being so close to him, it were at a distance. "Who and what are you?" Scrooge demanded. "I am the ghost of Christmas past." "Long past?" inquired Scrooge, observant of its dwarfish stature. "No, your past." Perhaps Scrooge could not have told anybody why, if anybody could have asked him, but he had a special desire to see the spirit in his cap, and begged him to be covered. "What?" exclaimed the ghost. "Would you so soon put out with worldly hands the light which I give? Is it not enough that you are one of those whose passions made this cap, and forced me through years to wear it low upon my brow?" Scrooge reverently disclaimed any intention to offend or any knowledge of having willfully bonneted the spirit at any point in his life. He then made bold to inquire what business brought him there. "Your welfare," said the ghost. Scrooge expressed himself much obliged, but could not help thinking that a night of unbroken rest would have been more conducive to that end. The spirit must have heard him thinking, for it said immediately, "Your reclamation, then. Take heed." It put out its strong hand as it spoke, and clasped him gently by the arm. "Rise, and walk with me." It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not appropriate for pedestrian purposes, that bed was warm and the thermometer a long way below freezing, that he was clad but lightly in his slippers, dressing gown, and nightcap, and that he had a cold upon him at the time. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, clasped his robe in supplication. "I am immortal," Scrooge remonstrated, "and liable to fall." "Bear but a touch of my hand there," said the spirit, laying it upon his heart, "and you shall be upheld in more than this." As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road with fields on either side. The city had entirely vanished. Not a vestige of it was to be seen. The darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was a clear, cold winter day with snow upon the ground. "Good heaven!" said Scrooge, clasping his hands together as he looked about him. "I know this place. I was a boy here." The spirit gazed upon him mildly. Its gentle touch, though it had been light and instantaneous, appeared still present in the old man's sense of feeling. He was conscious of 1,000 odors floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys and cares, long, long forgotten. "Your lip is trembling," said the ghost. "And what is that upon your cheek?" Scrooge muttered, with an unusual catching in his voice, that it was a pimple, and begged the ghost to lead him where he would. "You recollect the way?" inquired the spirit. "Remember it," cried Scrooge with fervor. "I could walk it blindfolded." "Strange to have forgotten it for so many years," observed the ghost. "Let us go on." They walked along the road, Scrooge recognizing every gate and post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance, with its bridge, its church, and its winding river. Some shaggy ponies now were seen trotting toward them with boys upon their backs, who called to other boys in country gigs and carts driven by farmers. All of these boys were in great spirits and shouted to each other until the broad fields were so full of merry music that the crisp air laughed to hear it. "These are but shadows of things that have been," said the ghost. "They have no consciousness of us." The cheerful travelers came on, and as they came, Scrooge knew and named every single one of them. But why was he rejoiced beyond all bounds to see them? Why did his cold eye glisten and his heart leap up as they went past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas as they parted at crossroads and byways for their several homes? What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon Merry Christmas! What good had it ever done to him? "The school is not quite deserted," said the ghost. "A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still." Scrooge said he knew it, and he sobbed. They left the high road by a well-remembered lane, and soon approached a mansion of dull red brick with a little weathercock-surmounted cupola on the roof, and a bell hanging inside it. It was a large house, but one of broken fortunes, for the spacious offices were little used, their walls were damp and mossy, their windows broken, and their gates decayed. Fowls clucked and strutted in the stables, and the coach-houses and sheds were overrun with grass. Nor was it more retentive of its ancient state within, for entering the dreary hall and glancing through the open doors of many rooms, they found them poorly furnished, cold, and vast. There was an earthy savor in the air, a chilly bareness in the place which associated itself somehow with too much getting up by candlelight and not too much to eat. The ghost and Scrooge went across the hall to a door at the back of the house. It opened before them and disclosed a long, bare, melancholy room, made barer still by lines of plain deal forms and desks. At one of these, a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down upon a form and wept to see his poor forgotten self as he used to be. Not a latent echo in the house. Not a squeak and scuffle from the mice behind the paneling. Not a drip from the half-thawed water spout in the dull yard beyond. Not a sigh among the leafless boughs of one despondent poplar. Not the idle swinging of an empty storehouse door. Not even a clicking in the fire. No sound fell upon the heart of Scrooge with a softening influence. The spirit touched him, and as they looked on the small boy intent on his reading, Scrooge called out, "Poor boy!" and he cried again. "I wish," he muttered, putting his hand in his pocket and looking about him after drying his eyes with his cuff. "But it's too late now." "What is the matter?" asked the spirit. "Nothing," said Scrooge. "Nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should like to have given him something. That's all." The ghost smiled thoughtfully and waved its hand, saying as it did so, "Let us see another Christmas." Scrooge's former self grew larger at the words, and the room became a little darker and more dirty. The panels shrunk, the windows cracked, fragments of plaster fell out of the ceiling, and the naked lathes were shown instead. But how all of this was brought about, Scrooge knew no more than you do. He only knew that it was quite correct, that everything had happened so. That there he was, alone again, when all the other boys had gone home for the jolly holidays. He was not reading now, but walking up and down despairingly. Scrooge looked at the ghost and with a mournful shaking of his head, glanced anxiously toward the door. It opened, and a little girl much younger than the boy came darting in, and putting her arms around his neck, addressed him as her dear, dear brother. "I have come to bring you home, dear brother," said the child, clapping her tiny hands and bending down to laugh. "To bring you home, home, home." "Home, little Fan?" returned the boy. "Yes," said the child, brimful of glee. "Home for good and all, home forever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be. Home, it's like a heaven. He spoke so gently to me one night when I was going to bed that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home. And he said yes, you should, and sent me in a coach to bring you," said the child, opening her eyes. "You're never to come back here, but first, we're to be together all Christmas long and have the merriest time in the world." She clapped her hands and laughed, and tried to touch his head, but being too little, laughed again and stood on tiptoe to embrace him. Then she began to drag him toward the door, and he, with nothing to take with him, accompanied her. "Always a delicate creature whom a breath might have withered," said the ghost, "but she had a large heart." "So she had," cried Scrooge. "You're right. I will not gainsay it, spirit. God forbid." "She died a woman," said the ghost, "and had, as I think, children." "One child," Scrooge returned. "True," said the ghost. "Your nephew." Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind, and answered briefly, "Yes." In the blink of an eye, the school was left behind them, and they were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city, where shadowy passengers passed and repassed, carts and coaches battled for the way. Surrounding them, they found all the strife and tumult of the city at every turn. It was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that it was Christmas time again, except now it was evening, and the streets glowed in hazy lamplight. The spirit stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it. "Know it?" said Scrooge. "I was apprenticed here." They went in, at the sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting behind such a high desk that if he had been but 2 inches taller, he would have knocked his head against the ceiling. Scrooge cried out in great excitement, "Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig alive again!" Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which at that very moment announced the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed deeply, and called out in a comfortable, rich, jovial voice, "Yo-ho there! Ebenezer! Dick!" Scrooge's former self, now grown into a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice. "Dick Wilkins, to be sure," said Scrooge to the ghost. "Bless me, yes! Look! There he is!" "No more work tonight, my boys. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up," cried old Fezziwig with a sharp clap of his hands, "before a man can say Jack Robinson." You would not believe how quickly those two fellows went about Fezziwig's command. They charged into the streets with the shutters, 1, 2, 3, had them up in their places, 4, 5, 6, barred them and pinned them, 7, 8, 9, and came back in before you could have got to 12, faces flushed and breathing hot steam into the cold night air. "Hilly-ho!" cried old Fezziwig, skipping down from his high desk. "Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here. Hilly-ho, Dick! Cheer up, Ebenezer!" Clear away! There was nothing that they wouldn't have cleared away or couldn't have cleared away with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable item was packed off as if it were dismissed from public life forevermore. The floor was swept and watered, lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was as snug and warm and as bright a ballroom as you would desire to see upon a winter's night. And as if sensing the room's sudden vacancy, it began to fill with the cheeriest assortment of characters. In came a fiddler with a music book and went up to the lofty desk, making a full orchestra of it. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable, followed closely by the 6 young men whose hearts they had broken. In came all the young men and women employed by the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin, the baker, followed by the cook with her brother's particular friend, the milkman. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling, yet in they all came, anyhow and everyhow. The dancing began immediately, and with such flourish that Scrooge's head began to swim in time with the fiddler's tune. One after another, the couples formed, taking their places on the dance floor, calling to one another and cheering, welcoming and shaking hands, wishing a Merry Christmas and laughing for no reason in particular. And away they went, 20 couples at once, hands half round and back again the other way, down the middle and up again, round and round in various stages of affectionate grouping, old top couple always turning up in the wrong place, new top couple starting off again as soon as they got there, and when at last the dancers lost their way in the merriment and no longer knew which couple was leading, old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done!" And the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter, especially provided for that purpose. Lifting his head, he instantly began the music again, as if there had been some other fiddler playing before and had been carried home, exhausted, on a shutter, and this was a brand new man, resolved to beat him out of sight or perish trying. There were more dances, and there were forfeits, followed by more dances, followed by cake. There was mulled wine and great hunks of cold roast and salted pork. There were mince pies, sweet treats, baked apples, and plenty of beer. The merriment continued well into the night until at last the clock struck 11, bringing an end to this festive domestic ball. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door, shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wishing him or her a Merry Christmas. When everybody had retired but the 2 apprentices, they did the same with them, and thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to retire in their shared boarding room in the back of old Fezziwig's shop. During the whole of this time, Scrooge had acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene and with his former self. He corroborated everything, remembered everything, enjoyed everything, and underwent the strangest agitation. It was not until now, when the bright face of his former self was turned from him, that he remembered the ghost and became conscious that it was looking full upon him. "A small matter," said the ghost, "to make these silly folks so full of gratitude." "Small," echoed Scrooge. The spirit signed for him to listen to the 2 apprentices, who were pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig, and when he had done so, said, "Why, is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 at the most. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?" "It isn't that," said Scrooge, heated by the remark, and speaking unconsciously like his former, not latter self. "It isn't that, spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune." He felt the spirit's glance and stopped. "What is the matter?" asked the ghost. "Nothing particular," said Scrooge. "Something, I think," the ghost insisted. "No," said Scrooge. "No. I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now, that's all." His former self turned down the lamps as he gave utterance to the wish, and Scrooge and the ghost stood side by side in the open air. "My time grows short," observed the spirit. "Quick." This was not addressed to Scrooge, nor anyone whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect, for again Scrooge saw himself. But he was older now, a man in the prime of his life. His face had not the harsh and rigid lines of later years, but it had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in the eye, which showed the passion that had already taken root, and where the shadow of a growing tree would fall. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young woman in a morning dress, in whose eyes there were tears, which sparkled in the light of a waning sun setting on the horizon. "It matters little," she said softly. "To you, very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can cheer and comfort you in time to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve." "What idol has displaced you?" he rejoined. "A golden one." "This is the even-handed dealing of the world," he said. "There is nothing on it as hard as poverty, and yet there is nothing it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth." "You fear the world too much," she answered gently. "All of your other hopes have merged into the hope of being beyond the chance of its sordid reproach. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion, gain, engrosses you. Have I not?" "What then?" he retorted. "Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I am not changed towards you." She shook her head. "Am I?" "Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so, until in good season we could improve our worldly fortune by our patient industry." "You are changed, Scrooge. When it was made, you were another man." The younger Scrooge sighed deeply. "I was a boy," he said impatiently. "Your own feeling tells you that you are not now who you were then," she returned. "I am. That which promised happiness when we were one in heart is fraught with misery now that we are two. How often and how keenly I have felt this, I will not say. It is enough that I have thought of it, and I release you." "Have I ever sought release?" "In words? No, never." "In what then? In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope, and its great end. In everything that made my love of any worth or value in your sight. If this had never been between us," said the girl, looking mildly but with steadiness upon him, "tell me, would you seek me out now and try to win me?" He seemed to yield to the justice of the supposition in spite of himself. But he said with a struggle, "You think not." "I would gladly think otherwise if I could," she answered. "Heaven knows, but if you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can even I believe that you would choose a dowerless girl? You who in your very confidence with her weigh everything by gain. Even if for a moment you were false enough to your one guiding principle to do so, do I not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow?" I do. And so I release you, with a full heart for the love of who you once were." He was about to speak, but her head turned from him, and she resumed. "You may have pain in this release. The memory of what we shared together and who we once were makes me hope that you will. But I know that it will be brief, and you will dismiss the recollection of it gladly, as an unprofitable dream from which you gladly woke." She turned to him with tears streaking her gentle face. "May you be happy with the life that you have chosen." With this, she stood, leaving him forever. "Spirit," said Scrooge in a broken voice, "show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight in torturing me?" "I told you these were the shadows of things that have been," said the ghost. "I own no blame for their existence, for this is not my life that we behold." "Remove me!" Scrooge exclaimed. "I cannot bear it." He turned upon the ghost, and seeing that its face had shifted in form, somehow reflecting fragments of all the faces it had shown him that night, he grasped the ghost with both hands and wrestled with it. "Leave me be! Take me back! Haunt me no longer!" In the struggle, if it can be called a struggle, given the ghost gave no resistance and seemed undisturbed, Scrooge observed that its light was burning high and bright. Dimly connecting this light with its influence over him, he seized the extinguisher cap and by a sudden action pressed it down upon the ghost's head. The spirit dropped beneath it, the extinguisher covering its whole form, and though Scrooge pressed it down with all of his force, he could not hide the light. Instead of beaming outward and upward, it pulsed and poured out from underneath, an unbroken flood upon the ground, enveloping Scrooge's feet and licking up the seams of his nightgown. Section 3. The Second Spirit. Waking in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was once again upon the stroke of 1. He felt that he was restored to consciousness right in the nick of time for the especial purpose of holding conference with Marley's second messenger. This time, wishing to challenge the spirit in the moment of its appearance, he drew his curtains back and established a sharp lookout all around the bed. He readied himself for a broad range of strange appearances, and nothing between a baby or a rhinoceros would have astonished him. Though, being prepared for almost anything, he was not prepared by any means for nothing. And consequently, when the bell struck 1 and no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour went by, yet nothing came. Looking keenly about his surroundings, he suddenly realized the keyhole of the adjoining sitting room was glowing. A keyhole? Glowing? Nothing of this made sense, but from the safety of his bed, Scrooge fixed his eyes upon the door and studied it. No, the keyhole was not glowing, but illuminated so brightly by an unseen force in the next room that it cast a radiant amber hue into his darkened chamber. Somehow, this was more terrifying than a dozen ghosts appearing at his bedside at once, for it had no logic, no sense, no clear sign of action. Though his body shivered in fear, Scrooge slowly made his way across the room to inspect the mysterious light. Mustering up every bit of courage afforded to him, he reached out to enter into the adjoining room. The moment Scrooge's hand was on the lock, a strange voice called to him by his name and bade him enter. He obeyed. It was his own room, there was no doubt about that, but it had undergone an extraordinary transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove, from every part of which bright gleaming berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back in the light, as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mightier blaze than ever his dull petrified hearth had known roared up the chimney. Heaped upon the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, suckling pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12th cakes, and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. In an easy state upon this couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch shaped like a horn of plenty, and he held it up, high up, to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping around the door. "Come in," exclaimed the ghost. "Come in and know me better, man." Scrooge entered timidly and hung his head before the spirit. He was not the dogged Scrooge he had been, and though the spirit's eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet them. "I am the ghost of Christmas present," said the spirit. "Look upon me." Scrooge reverently did so. It was clothed in one simple green robe bordered with white fur. This garment hung so loosely on the figure that its capacious breast was bare, as if disdaining to be warded or concealed by any artifice. Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds of the garment, were also bare, and on its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath, set here and there with shining icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face, its sparkling eye, its open hand, its cheery voice, its unconstrained demeanor, and its joyful air. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust. "You have never seen the like of me before." "Never," Scrooge made answer to it. "Have never walked forth with my elder brothers born these later years," pursued the phantom. "I don't think I have," said Scrooge.
I'm afraid I have not. Have you many brothers, Spirit?
More than 1,800, said the ghost.
A tremendous family to provide for,
Scrooge returned. The ghost of Christmas Present laughed deeply and rose to his full height. Touch my robe, the ghost bellowed, his rich voice echoing deep in the ample folds of his emerald garment. Scrooge did as he was told and held it fast. The room and all of its trimmings vanished instantly, and they stood in the city streets on Christmas morning. Though it was the cheeriest day of the year, their surroundings were surprisingly dull. The house fronts looked black enough, and the windows blacker, contrasting with the smooth white sheet of snow upon the roofs. The sky was gloomy, and the short streets were choked up with a dingy mist, half-thawed, half-frozen, whose heavier particles descended in a shower of sooty atoms, as if all the chimneys had, by one consent, caught fire and were blazing away to their dear hearts' content. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate or the town, and yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad that even the clearest summer air and the brightest summer sun might have endeavored to diffuse in vain. For the people who were shoveling away on the housetops were jovial and full of glee, calling out to one another from the parapets, and now and then exchanging a facetious snowball, laughing heartily if it went right and not less heartily if it went wrong. The poulterers' shops were still half open, and the fruiterers were radiant in their glory. There were great, round, pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts, shaped like the waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen lolling at the doors and tumbling out into the street in their opulence. There were pears and apples, clustered high in blooming pyramids, and there were piles of filberts, mossy and brown, recalling in their fragrance ancient walks among the woods. There were slow-baked pastries, squat and swarthy, setting off the yellow of the oranges and lemons, beseeching to be carried home in paper bags and eaten after dinner. Soon the tolling bells called all good people to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the street in their best clothes and with their gayest faces. And at the same time there emerged from scores of by-streets, lanes, and nameless turnings, innumerable people carrying their dinners to the bakers' shops. The sight of these revelers appeared to interest the spirit very much, for he stood with Scrooge beside him in a baker's doorway, and as they passed, sprinkled incense on their dinners from his torch.
Is there a peculiar flavor in what you sprinkle from your torch?
Asked Scrooge. There is. My own.
Would it apply to any kind of dinner on this day?
Asked Scrooge. To any kindly given, but to a poor one most.
Why a poor one most?
Asked Scrooge. Because it needs it most. And perhaps it was the pleasure the good spirit had in showing off this power of his, or else it was his own kind, generous, hearty nature and his sympathy with all poor men that led him straight to the house of Bob Cratchit. For there he went, and he took Scrooge with him, holding on to his robe. And on the threshold of the door the spirit smiled and stopped to bless the clerk's dwelling with a sprinkling from his torch. Then rose up Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show for 6 pence. And she laid out the cloth, assisted by the second of her daughters, Belinda. While the eldest boy, Peter, busied himself with the potatoes, 2 smaller Cratchits, a boy and a girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose and known it for their own. Basking in thoughts of sage and onion, these young Cratchits danced about the table while Peter blew the fire until the pot of potatoes came bubbling up, knocking loudly at the saucepan lid and begging to be let out and peeled. "Whatever has got your precious father, then?" said Mrs. Cratchit, "and your brother, Tiny Tim, and Martha wasn't as late last Christmas by half an hour." "Here's Martha, mother," said a young woman, appearing at the Cratchits' front door as she spoke. "Here's Martha, mother," cried the 2 young Cratchits. "Hurrah! There's such a goose, Martha!" "Why, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are," said Mrs. Cratchit, kissing her a dozen times and taking off her shawl and bonnet. "We'd a deal of work to finish up last night and had to clear it all away this morning," replied the girl, desperately trying to hold the 2 youngest Cratchits at arm's length as they leaped and skipped circles around her legs, pleading for her attention. "What is it, you 2? "Father's coming, Martha!" cried the 2 young Cratchits, tugging her toward the table and lifting the cloth. "Hide, Martha, hide!" So Martha hid herself, and in came Bob with at least 3 feet of scarf hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes were darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim sat upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch, and his right leg was bound in an iron frame. "Why, where's our Martha?" cried Bob Cratchit, looking around. "Not coming," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Not coming," said Bob with a sudden drop in his high spirits. "Not coming on Christmas Day." Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, even if it were only a joke, so she came out prematurely from under the table and ran into his arms. The 2 young Cratchits, eager for Tiny Tim to hear the pudding whistling in the copper, shuffled him off to the wash-house. Mrs. Cratchit quickly tore the hat, jacket, scarf, and mittens from her son as he struggled to keep up with his siblings. "And how did Tiny Tim behave?" asked Mrs. Cratchit, stashing the boy's articles in the waiting closet. "As good as gold and better," said Bob. "Somehow he gets thoughtful, sitting by himself so much, and he thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me coming home that he hoped that people saw him in church, because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant for them to remember upon Christmas Day who made the lame beggars to walk and the blind men to see." Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this, and trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hearty. As if beckoned by the story, his active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool before the fire. And while Bob, turning up his cuffs, as if, poor fellow, they were capable of being made more shabby, compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons, and stirred it around and round and put it on the hob to simmer. Peter and the 2 ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. Such a bustle ensued you might have thought a goose was the rarest of all birds, a feathered phenomenon to which a black swan was nothing but common. And in truth, it was something very like it in that house. All at once the family leapt into action. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy hissing hot. Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigor. Belinda sweetened the applesauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a corner at the table, and the 2 young Cratchits set chairs for everybody, not forgetting themselves, and mounted guard upon their posts. At last the dishes were set on and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it into the breast. But when she did, and the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose around the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the 2 young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife and feebly cried, "Hurrah!" There never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't think that there was ever such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavor, size and richness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of flesh left upon the bird, they hadn't ate it all at last. Yet everyone had had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onion to their eyebrows. But now, as Belinda changed the plates, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone to take the pudding up and bring it in, far too nervous for any help to bear witness. The 2 young Cratchits whispered anxiously amongst themselves. Suppose it should not be done enough. Suppose that it should break in the turning out. Suppose somebody should have got over the wall of the backyard and stolen it while they were merry with the goose. A supposition at which the 2 young Cratchits became livid. All sorts of horrors were supposed. Suddenly, and without a great fanfare, hello! A great deal of steam, and the pudding was out of the copper. The amorous scent of spices and dried citrus peel followed Mrs. Cratchit as she walked in, the pudding in tow. A smell that only Christmas could bear. Their beloved dessert blanketed in a wrapping of steam-dampened linen, speckled with raisins, cherries, figs, and suet. The blend of rich animal fat, pungent spices, and familiar linen made visions of an eating house and a pastry cook's next door to each other, with the laundresses next door to that. In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit turned, flushed but smiling proudly, with the pudding all ablaze in flames of ignited brandy and adorned with a sprig of Christmas holly stuck into its top. Oh, what a wonderful pudding! Bob Cratchit said that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Mrs. Cratchit said that now that the weight was off her mind, she would confess that she had her doubts about the quantity of flour. Everybody had something to say about it. Compliments and cheers rang out, echoing against the walls of the family's small home. And regardless of the pudding's meager size, nobody said or thought that it was at all too small a pudding for such a large family. It would have been flat heresy to do so. Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. At last the dinner was all done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. The compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect, apples and oranges were put upon the table and a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. As they sputtered and crackled noisily, Bob busied himself with pouring out the contents of the hot jug, passing glasses to each of the waiting Cratchits. Lifting his own, he proposed, "Mr. Scrooge," said Bob, "I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." "The founder of the feast, indeed!" cried Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. "I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I'd hope that he'd have a good appetite for it." "My dear," said Bob, "the children! Christmas Day." "It should be Christmas Day, I'm sure," she said, "on which one drinks to the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you." "My dear," was Bob's mild answer, "Christmas Day. I'll drink to his health for your sake, and the day's," said Mrs. Cratchit, "but not for his. Long life to him, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt." The children joined her in their toast. It was the first of the proceedings which had no heartiness. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care tuppence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The very mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which could only be dispelled by Bob as he cheered, "A Merry Christmas to all of us, my dears! God bless us!" which all of the family re-echoed. "God bless us, every one," said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held the boy's withered hand in his and wished to keep him safe by his side, as if he dreaded that this little boy might be taken from him. "Spirit," said Scrooge, with an interest he had never felt before, "tell me, will Tiny Tim live?" "I see a vacant seat," replied the ghost, "in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die." "No, no," said Scrooge. "No, no, kindly spirit. Say that he will be spared." "If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race will find him here." Turning on Scrooge, the ghost said, "What then? If he be like to die, he had better do it and decrease the surplus population." Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief. "Man," said the ghost, "will you decide which shall live and which shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child. Oh God, to hear the insect on the leaf pronouncing too much life among his hungry brothers in the dust." Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, and trembling, cast his eyes upon the ground. By this time it was getting dark and snowing heavily. Placing a great hand on the old man's shoulder, the spirit led Scrooge away from the Cratchit's window and off into the city. As they walked, the brightness of roaring fires in kitchens, parlors, and all sorts of rooms was wonderful. Blessings on it, how the ghost exulted, how it bared its breadth of chest and opened its capacious palm, outpouring with a generous hand its bright and harmless mirth on everything within its reach. And now, without a word of warning from the ghost, they stood upon a bleak and desert moor, where monstrous masses of rude stone were cast about as though it were the burial place of giants. Down in the west, the setting sun had left a streak of fiery red, which glared upon the desolation for an instant, like a sullen eye, and frowning lower, lower, lower yet, was lost in the thick gloom of darkest night.
What is this place?
Asked Scrooge. A place where miners live, who labor in the bowels of the earth, returned the spirit. But even here they know me. Look. A light shone from the window of a hut, and swiftly they advanced towards it. Passing through the wall of mud and stone, they found a cheerful company assembled around a glowing fire. An old man and woman, with their children and their children's children, and another generation beyond that, all decked out gaily in their holiday attire. The old man, in a voice that seldom rose above the howling wind that raked across the barren waste, was singing to them a Christmas song, and from time to time they all joined in the chorus. So surely as they raised their voice, the old man got quite blithe and loud. The spirit did not tarry here, but bade Scrooge to hold his robe, and passing on above the moor sped, whither? Surely not to sea. But to Scrooge's horror, looking back, he saw the last of the land, a frightful range of rocks behind them, and his ears were deafened by the thundering of waves as it rolled and roared and raged among the dreadful caverns it had worn. Built upon a dismal reef of sunken rocks some leagues from shore, there stood a solitary lighthouse. Great heaps of seaweed clung to its base, and storm birds rose and fell about it like the waves they skimmed. But even here, 2 men who watched the light had made a fire that, through the loophole in the thick stone wall, shed out a ray of brightness onto the awful sea. Joining their weathered hands over the rough table at which they sat, they wished each other Merry Christmas. And one of them, the elder, with his face as damaged and scarred with hard weather as the figurehead of an old ship might be, struck up a sturdy song that was like a gale in itself. Again the ghost sped on, above the black and heaving sea, on, until being far away from any shore, they lighted on a ship. They stood beside the helmsman at the wheel, the lookout at the bow, the officers who had watch, dark, ghostly figures in their several stations. But every man among them hummed a Christmas tune, or had a Christmas thought, or spoke below his breath to his companion to some bygone Christmas day, with homeward hopes belonging to it. Every man on board, waking or sleeping, good or bad, had a kinder word for one another that day. They shared in its festivities and had remembered those they cared for so far, far away, beyond the shores of home. While listening to the moaning wind and thinking how solemn it was to move on through the lonely darkness over an unknown abyss, whose depths obscured secrets as unknown and profound as death itself, it was a great surprise to Scrooge to hear a hearty laugh. And it was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room, with the spirit smiling by his side. It is a fair, even-handed, noble adjustment of things, that while there is infection and disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humor. When Scrooge's nephew laughed in this way, holding his sides, rolling his head, and twisting his face into the most extravagant contortions, Scrooge's niece by marriage laughed as heartily as he, and their assembled friends, being not a bit behindhand, roared out lustily. "He said that Christmas was a humbug, as I live!" cried Scrooge's nephew. "He believed it, too!" "More shame for him, Fred," said Scrooge's niece indignantly. "He's a comical old fellow, that's the truth," said Scrooge's nephew, "and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offenses carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him." "I'm sure he is very rich, Fred," hinted Scrooge's niece. "At least, you always tell me so." "And what of that, my dear?" said Scrooge's nephew. "His wealth is of no use to him. He doesn't do any good with it. He doesn't make himself comfortable with it. He hasn't even the satisfaction of he hasn't even the satisfaction of thinking that he is ever going to benefit us with it." "I have no patience with him," observed Scrooge's niece. The rest of the women present nodded their agreement. "Oh, I have," said Scrooge's nephew. "I am sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself, always. Here, he takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't even come dine with us. And what's the consequence? He doesn't lose out on much of a dinner. I think he loses a very good dinner, interrupted Scrooge's niece. Everybody said the same. I was only going to say, said Scrooge's nephew, that the consequence of his taking a dislike to us and not making merry with us is, as I think, that he loses some pleasant moments which could do him no harm. I am sure that he loses pleasanter companions than those he can find in his own thoughts, either in his moldy old office or his dusty chambers. I mean to give him the same chance every year, whether he likes it or not. For I pity him. He may rail at Christmas till he dies, but he can't help thinking better of it. I defy him if he finds me going there in good temper year after year and saying, Uncle Scrooge, how are you? If it only puts him in the vein to leave his poor clerk £50, that's something. And I think I shook him yesterday. The crowd assembled all laughed at the idea of Scrooge being shaken by the young man, and the spirit turned slyly in the old man's direction. Scrooge, slightly embarrassed by his nephew's story, busied his gaze on a small spot upon the floor. After tea they had some music. Scrooge's niece played well upon the harp, and played among other tunes a simple little air that had been a favorite of Scrooge's sister, perhaps a whisper of her life left to hang in the halls of her only son's home. When this strain of music sounded, all the things the ghost of Christmas past had shown Scrooge came to his mind. He softened more and more and thought, if he could only have listened to it often, years ago, he might have cultivated the kindness of life for his own happiness with his own hands, instead of resorting to the spade that buried Jacob Marley. Once the music ended, the lively gathering moved immediately into games. The room insisted on a round of how, when, and where, a game of quick-witted logic and questioning. Scrooge's niece, a fastidiously bright and intelligent woman, quickly took the game in hand and made quick work of each round. Scrooge, delighted by his niece's wit, was moved to play along with her. So enthralled by the game, Scrooge wholly forgot that his voice made no sound in their ears. He sometimes came out with his guesses quite loud, and very often guessed right, too, for the sharpest needle was not sharper than Scrooge, blunt as he took it in his head to be. The ghost was greatly pleased to find him in this mood, and looked upon him with such favor that Scrooge begged like a boy to be allowed to stay until the guests departed. But this, the spirit said, could not be done. Well, here's a new game, said Scrooge. 1/2 hour, spirit, only one. It was a game called Yes and No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something and the rest must find out what, with him only answering to their questions either yes or no. The brisk fire of questioning to which he was exposed elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal. A live animal, a rather disagreeable animal, a savage animal, an animal that growled and grunted sometimes and sometimes talked, and lived in London, walked about the streets, but was not made a show of, and was not led about by anyone, and did not live in a menagerie. It was never killed in a market, and was not a horse, an ass, a cow, a bull, a tiger, a dog, a pig, a cat, or a bear. At every fresh question that was put upon him, his nephew burst into a fresh roar of laughter, and was so inexpressibly tickled that he was obliged to get up off the sofa and stamp. At last, Scrooge's niece, falling into a similar state, cried out, I found it out! I know what it is, Fred! I know what it is! What is it? Cried Fred. It's your Uncle Scrooge! Which it certainly was. Admiration was the universal sentiment, though some objected that the reply to, is it a bear, ought to have been yes. He has given us plenty of merriment, I am sure, said Fred, and it would be ungrateful not to drink to his health. So please, raise your glasses to my dear, dear old Uncle Scrooge. Well, Uncle Scrooge, they cried. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, wherever he is, said Scrooge's nephew. Uncle Scrooge had imperceptibly become so gay and light of heart that he would have pledged the unconscious company in return and thanked them with an inaudible speech. But the whole scene passed off in the breath of the last word spoken by his nephew, and he and the spirit were once again upon their travels. Much they saw, and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirit stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful. On foreign lands, and they were close at home. By struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope. by poverty, and it was rich. In almhouse, hospital, and jail, in misery's every refuge where man had not made fast the door and barred the spirit out, he left his blessing. It was a long night, if it were only a night, but Scrooge had his doubts of this. They had borne witness to so many Christmas holidays it seemed impossible that this was still the same day. It was strange, too, that while Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older. As the two left a children's 12th night party, Scrooge looked upon the ghost and realized his ample curls had changed from chestnut brown to gray.
"Are spirits' lives so short?"
asked Scrooge. "My life upon this globe is very brief," replied the ghost. "It ends tonight."
"Tonight?"
cried Scrooge. "Tonight at midnight. Hark, the time is drawing near." At that very moment, the bells began to toll 11:15.
"Forgive me if I am not justified in what I ask,"
said Scrooge, looking intently at the spirit's robe.
"But I see something strange and not belonging to yourself protruding from your skirts. Is that a foot or a claw?"
"It might be a claw for the flesh there is upon it," was the spirit's sorrowful reply. "Look here." From the foldings of its robes it brought two children, wretched, abject, frightful, and hideous. They knelt down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment. "Oh, man, look here, look down here," exclaimed the ghost. They were a boy and a girl, yellow, meager, ragged, and scowling, but prostrate in their humility. Where graceful youth should have filled their features out and touched them with its freshest tints, a stale and shriveled hand like that of age had pinched and twisted them, pulling them into shreds. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out with menace. No change, no degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grade through all the mysteries of wonderful creation, has monsters half so horrible as these. Scrooge started back, appalled. Having them shown to him in this way, he tried to say that they were fine children, but the words choked on themselves rather than be parties of a lie of such an enormous magnitude.
"Spirit, are they yours?"
Scrooge could say no more.
"They are man's,"
said the spirit, looking down upon them,
"and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers.
This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both in all their degree, but most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that which is written, doom, unless the writing be erased."
"Have they no refuge, no resource?"
cried Scrooge.
"Are there no prisons?"
said the spirit, turning on him for the last time with his own words.
"Are there no workhouses?"
The ghost reached out as if to grab Scrooge by the front of his shirt, causing the old man to flinch, flinging his arms up to cover his face. Suddenly, the bell struck 12. Section 4. The Final Spirit. The phantom slowly, gravely approached in silence. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the very air through which this spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black hooded garment which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand, without which it would have been difficult to detach its figure from the night and separate it from the darkness by which it was surrounded. He felt that it was tall and stately when it came beside him, and that its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved.
"Am I in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come?"
said Scrooge. The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand.
"You are about to show me the shadows of things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us," Scrooge pursued. "Is that so, spirit?"
The upper portion of the garment was contracted for an instant in its folds, as if the spirit had inclined its head. That was the only answer he received. Although well used to ghostly company by this time, Scrooge feared the silent shape so much that his legs trembled beneath him, and he found that he could hardly stand when he prepared to follow it. The spirit paused for a moment, as if observing his condition and giving him time to recover. But Scrooge was all the worse for this. It thrilled him with a vague, uncertain horror to know that behind the dusky shroud there were ghostly eyes intently fixed upon him, while he, though he strained his own to the utmost, could see nothing but a spectral hand and one great heap of black.
"Ghost of the future!" he exclaimed. "I fear you more than any other spectre I have seen, but I know that your purpose is to do me good, and I am prepared to bear your company, and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?"
It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them.
"Lead on," said Scrooge. "Lead on! The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit."
The phantom moved away as it had come towards him. Scrooge followed in the shadow of its dress, which bore him up, he thought, and carried him along. They scarcely seemed to enter the city. Rather, the city seemed to spring up about them, encompassing Scrooge and the phantom on its own accord. But there they were, in the heart of it, amongst the merchants who hurried up and down, clinking the money in their pockets, conversing in groups, looking at their watches, trifling thoughtfully with their gold seals and so forth, as Scrooge had often seen them do. Passing through a great throng of people choking the public square, the phantom stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Observing that its hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their conversation. "No," said a large man with a monstrous chin. "I don't know much about it either way. I only know that he's dead." "When did he die?" inquired another. "Last night, I believe." "Why, what was the matter with him?" asked a third, taking a vast quantity of snuff out of a very large snuff box. "I thought he'd never die."
"God knows,"
said the first with a yawn. "What has he done with his money?" asked a red-faced gentleman.
"I haven't heard,"
said the man with a large chin, yawning again. "Left it to his company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me, that's all I know." This pleasantry was received with a general laugh. "It's likely to be a very cheap funeral," said the same speaker, "for upon my life I don't know of anybody to go to it." Suppose we make up a party and volunteer?" "I don't mind going if a lunch is provided," observed a gentleman with a red face. Another laugh. "Well, I am the most disinterested among you, after all," said the first speaker, "for I never wear gloves and I never eat lunch. But I'll offer to go, if anybody else will. When I come to think of it, I'm not sure that I wasn't his most particular friend. Heaven knows I never once saw him speak to another soul for any reason other than business." "Well, we can't hold him at too much fault for that, can we?" said the red-faced man, laughing deeply. Together, the men wandered off, disappearing into the square with their chatter fading as they walked. Scrooge was surprised that the spirit would attach such importance to conversations so apparently trivial. But feeling assured that they must have some hidden purpose, he set himself to uncover their deeper meaning. They could scarcely be supposed to have any bearing on the death of Jacob, his old partner, for that was past, and the province of this ghost was the future. Nor could he think of anyone immediately connected with himself to whom they could apply. Regardless of their mystery, Scrooge knew this conversation had some latent moral for his own improvement, and he resolved to treasure every word he heard, everything he saw, especially to observe the shadow of himself when it appeared. For he had an expectation that the conduct of his future self would give him the clue he missed, and would render the solution of these riddles easy. He set about, peering through the crowd for his own image, though it was nowhere to be seen. The clock pointed to his usual time of day for being there, but he saw no likeness of himself among the multitudes. Even his usual corner was presently occupied by another man. Though he hoped his future self's appearance would shed light on the proceedings, its absence gave him hope. For he had been revolving in his mind a change of life, and perhaps the new Scrooge had other dealings than those with the merchants. Lost in thought, Scrooge had all but forgotten the looming shadow of the spirit who accompanied him. Quiet and dark, It stood beside him with its outstretched hand. When he roused himself from his thoughtful quest, he realized the hand was now pointed directly at his chest. Tracing the long arm of the spirit up to the hood of its cloak, Scrooge found the unseen eyes were now looking directly upon him. It made him shudder and feel very cold. They left the busy scene and went to an obscure part of town where Scrooge had never penetrated before, although he recognized its situation and its bad repute. The ways were foul and narrow, the shops and houses wretched, the people half naked, drunken, slipshod, and ugly. Alleys and archways, like so many cesspools, disgorged their offenses of smell and dirt and life upon the straggling streets. The whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth, and with misery. Far into this den of infamous resort, there was a low-browed beetling shop where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were brought. Upon the floor within were piled up heaps of rusty keys, nails, chains, and refuse iron of all kinds. Secrets that few would like to scrutinize were bred and hidden in the mountains of unseemly rags, masses of corrupted fat, and sepulchres of bones. Sitting in among the wares he dealt in, by a charcoal stove made of old bricks, was a gray-haired rascal, nearly 70 years of age. Scrooge and the Phantom came into the presence of this man just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. She had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black. All three guests stared at one another in blank astonishment, not only to find one another here, but to recognize each other. After a moment's silence, they all three burst into a laugh. "Imagine that!" cried the woman who arrived first. "A charwoman, followed up by the laundress herself, with no one but the undertaker's man bringing up the rear from behind. Look at that, old Joe, if we haven't all three met here at once without meaning it." "You couldn't have met in a better place," said old Joe, removing the pipe from his mouth. "We're all suitable to our calling and all equally well matched. Come on, then. Come into the parlor." The parlor, if it could be called that, was a fetid space, shoddily kept hidden behind a screen of hanging rags. The old man raked the fire together with an old stair rod, and having trimmed his smoky lamp with the stem of his pipe, put it in his mouth again. While he did this, the charwoman hobbled in and threw her bundle on the floor. She sat down in a flaunting manner on a stool, crossing her elbows on her knees. Catching the other two staring at her mysterious bounty, she glared back with a bold look of defiance in her eyes. "What's the problem then, Mrs. Dilber?" said the woman defensively. "Every person has the right to take care of themselves. He always did." "That's true indeed," said the laundress. "No man more so." "Very well then," cried the woman. "Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose. If you wanted to keep him after he was dead, a wicked old screw, why wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have had somebody to look after him while he was struck with death, instead of lying there, gasping out his last alone by himself." "It's the truest word that was ever spoke," said Mrs. Dilber. "It's a judgment on him." "I wish it was a little heavier judgment," replied the woman, "and it would have been if I could have laid my hands on anything else. Open up that bundle, old Joe, and let me know the value of it. Speak it out plain. I'm not afraid to be the first, nor am I afraid for them to see it. We all know pretty well that we were helping ourselves before we met here, I believe. It's no sin. Open up the bundle, Joe." But the gallantry of her friends would not allow this, and the man in faded black, mounting the breach first, produced his plunder. It was not extensive. A seal or two, a pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, and a brooch of no great value. They were each examined and appraised by old Joe, who chalked up the sums he was disposed to give for each upon the wall, and added them up to a total when he found that there was nothing more to come. "That's your account," said Joe, handing a meager few coins to the undertaker's man. "And I wouldn't give another sixpence if I was to be boiled for not doing it. Who's next?" Mrs. Dilber was next. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner, and coins dispensed. "I always give too much to the ladies. It's a weakness of mine, and that's the way I ruin myself," said old Joe. "That's your account, and if you ask me for another penny and make me regret my generosity, I'll knock off half a crown." Mrs. Dilbert politely accepted her payout, and thinking for a moment that she would leave, chose instead to stay and see the charwoman's bounty unveiled. "And now undo my bundle, Joe," said the first woman. Joe went down on his knees for the greater convenience of opening it, and having unfastened a great many knots, dragged out a large and heavy roll of dark fabric. "What do you call this?" said Joe. The charwoman laughed, leaning forward on her crossed arms. "Bed curtains." "You don't mean to say that you took him down, rings and all, with him just lying there?" said Joe. "Yes, I do," replied the woman, "and why not?" "You were born to make your fortune," said Joe, eyeing the fabric's quality, "and you'll certainly do it." "For the sake of such a man as he was, I certainly wouldn't hold my hand when I can get anything in it by reaching out," returned the woman coolly. Careful with those blankets now." "His blankets?" asked Joe. "Who else's do you think?" replied the woman. "He isn't likely to take cold without 'em, I dare say." "I hope he didn't die of anything catching," said old Joe, stopping his work and looking up. He tenderly pinched the thick fabric between his thumb and forefinger, holding it away from his body as if some invisible creature would leap forth from its ample folds at any moment. Don't be afraid of that," returned the woman. "I ain't so fond of his company that I'd loiter about him for such things if he did." When old Joe produced her next stolen treasure, she said, You may look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole or a threadbare place on it. It's the best he had, and a fine one, too. They'd have wasted it if it hadn't been for me." "What do you mean wasting it?" asked old Joe. "Putting it on him to be buried in, for sure," replied the woman with a laugh. "Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again. If calico ain't good enough for such a purpose, it ain't good enough for anything. It's just as becoming to that old screw. He can't look any uglier than he did in that one." Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror. As they sat grouped about their spoil in the scanty light afforded by the old man's lamp, he viewed them with a detestation and disgust, which could hardly have been greater, though they had been obscene demons marketing the corpse itself. "That's the natural end of it, you see," laughed the old woman. "He frightened everyone away from him when he was alive, just to profit us when he was dead." "Spirit!" said Scrooge, shuddering from head to foot. I see the case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Oh, merciful heavens, what is this?" He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bed. A bare, uncurtained bed, on which, beneath a ragged sheet, there lay something covered up, which, though it was silent, announced itself in awful language. The room was very dark, too dark to be observed with any accuracy, though Scrooge glanced around it in obedience to a secret impulse, anxious to know what kind of room it was. A pale light, rising in the outer air, fell straight upon the bed, and on it, plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man. Scrooge glanced towards the phantom, its steady hand pointing to the corpse's head. The cover was so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it, the motion of just a finger upon Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face. He thought of it, felt how easy it would be to do, and longed to do it, but had no more power to withdraw the veil than to dismiss the spectre itself. "O cold, cold, rigid, dreadful death, set up thine altar here, and dress it with such terrors as thou hast at thy command, for this is thy dominion. But of the loved, revered, and honored head thou canst not turn one hair to thy dread purposes, or make one feature odious. It is not that the hand is heavy and will fall down when released. It is not that the heart and pulse are still, but that the hand was open, generous, and true, the heart brave, warm, and tender, the pulse a man's. Strike, shadow, strike, and see his good deeds springing from the wound to sow the world with life immortal." No voice pronounced these words in Scrooge's ears, and yet he heard them when he looked upon the bed. He thought, if this man could be raised up now, what would be his foremost thoughts? Avarice? Hard-dealing, griping cares? Truly, they have brought him to such a rich end. He lay in the dark, empty house, with not a man, a woman, or a child to say that he was kind to me. A cat was tearing at the door, and there was the sound of gnawing rats beneath the hearthstone. What they wanted in this room of death, and why they were so restless, disturbed, and eager to enter, Scrooge dare not think.
"Spirit," he said, "this is a fearful place. In leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson, trust me. Let us go."
Still, the ghost pointed with an unmoved finger to the head.
"I understand you, and I would do it if I could, but I have not the power, Spirit. I have not the power. If there is any person in this town who feels emotion caused by this man's death," said Scrooge, quite agonized, "show me that person, Spirit. I beseech you."
The spirit spread its dark robe before him for a moment, like a wing, and withdrawing it, revealed a room by daylight where a mother and her children were. She was expecting someone, and with anxious eagerness, for she walked up and down the room, started at every sound, looked out from the window, glanced at the clock, tried but in vain to work with her needle, and could hardly bear the voices of her children as they played. At long last, there was a knock on the door. She hurried over and opened it presently. Her husband, a young man with a face careworn and depressed well beyond his years, walked in calmly. He carried with him a remarkable demeanor, a kind of serious delight of which he felt ashamed and which he struggled to repress. After removing his hat and coat, he sat down to the dinner that had been waiting for him by the fire. Unable to tolerate the silence, the young woman asked what news he had, and he seemed embarrassed to answer. "Is it good?" she asked. "Or bad?" trying to help him find his words. "Bad," he answered.
"Are we quite ruined?"
"No, there's hope yet, Caroline."
"Has he relented? If so, there is," she said, amazed. "Nothing is past hope if such a miracle has happened."
"He is past relenting," said her husband. "He is dead." She was a mild and patient creature if her face spoke truth, but in her soul, she was thankful to hear it, and she said so with clasped hands. She prayed for forgiveness the next moment and was sorry, but the first was the emotion of her heart. "I thought the old woman had been lying when she told me that he was very ill, that it was a mere excuse to avoid my request for a week's delay. Turns out to have been quite true. He was not only ill, but dying."
"To whom will our debt be transferred?"
"I don't know. But before that time we will be ready with the money, and even if we weren't, it would be very unlikely to find such a merciless man in his successor. We may sleep tonight with light hearts, Caroline." Yes, soften it as they would, their hearts were lighter. Their children's faces, hushed and clustered around to hear what they so little understood, were brighter, and it was a happier house for this man's death. The only emotion that the ghost could show him caused by the event was one of pleasure.
"Please, let me see some tenderness connected with death," said Scrooge, "or that dark chamber, Spirit, and the enshrouded figure it holds will forever haunt me."
The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet, and as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but found nothing. Though he knew in his heart what truly lay beneath that pitiful garb in the dark room haunting his thoughts, he held out hope that he would pass a lighter, happier version of himself, made easy by the formative Christmases he had witnessed with these three spirits, that somehow he had changed his fortunes and made right, freeing his immortal future from the shackles and lockboxes that rattled and bound poor Marley. Scrooge was so distracted by the imagined weight of his own chains that he hardly noticed where they were heading. Passing through the narrow streets and into Camden Town, they arrived at the doorstep of Bob Cratchit. The old man's heart sank, and his throat tightened as the phantom silently bade him onward.
"Spirit,"
was all that could escape his rasping throat. Not Cratchit. What business would a spectre so grave have in a home so filled with warmth? The ghost's hand pointed at the door as its unseen eyes maintained a steady level on Scrooge's own. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house and found the mother and her children seated round the fire. Quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. Mrs. Cratchit, Belinda, and Martha were all engaged in sewing, and as Scrooge and the ghost entered, Mrs. Cratchit laid her work upon the table, a length of black fabric, and put her hand up to her face. "The color hurts my eyes," she said. The color, the silence, the mournful look on each of the Cratchit children's faces. "Oh, poor Tiny Tim." "They're better now," said Cratchit's wife. "Staring for so long at this dark cloth by candlelight makes them weak, and I wouldn't want to show weak eyes to your father when he comes home. Not for the world. It must be near his time." "Past it, rather," Peter answered, his head bowed, staring at the book in his lap. "But I think these past few evenings he has walked a little slower than he used to." They were very quiet again. At last, Mrs. Cratchit said in a steady, cheerful voice that only faltered once, "I have known him to walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder, very fast indeed." "And so have I," cried Peter. "Often. And so have I." "Me too," exclaimed another. So had they all. "But he was very light to carry," she said, picking up her work and resuming her stitches. "And his father loved him so much. It was never any trouble. No trouble at all." Suddenly a sound at the door. "And there is your father now." She hurried out to meet him, and Bob, with his scarf, he had need of it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried to welcome him home at once. While Mrs. Cratchit busied herself with the tea, Peter stoked the fire. The two young Cratchits got upon his knees and each laid a little cheek against his face, as if they said, "Don't mind it, father. Don't be sad." Bob was very cheerful with them and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long before Sunday, he said. "Sunday? You went today then, Robert?" said his wife. "Yes, my dear," returned Bob. "I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. But you'll see it often. I promised him I would walk there every Sunday." My little child," cried Bob. "My child." Sobbing, he left the room and went upstairs into the room above, which was lighted cheerfully and hung with Christmas. Bob sat down in a chair set close beside the child, and when he had thought a little and composed himself, he kissed the little face. He was reconciled to what had happened and went down again quite happy. They drew about the fire and talked. Bob told them of the extraordinary kindness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew, whom he had scarcely seen but once, but meeting him in the street that day and seeing that he looked a little down, inquired what had happened to distress him. "I told him about Tim," Bob said. "You know what he told me? I am heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit, and heartily sorry for your good wife as well. If I can be of any service to you in any way, please come visit me." It wasn't for the sake of anything that he might have been able to do for us so much as it was out of genuine kindness. It really seemed as if he had known our Tiny Tim and felt sorrow with us. "I am sure he's a good soul," said Mrs. Cratchit. "If you spoke with him yourself, you'd have no doubts, my dear," said Bob. Staring into the fire, he whispered, "He is much the man I hoped Tim would grow up to be, filled with warmth and kindness for his fellow man, even without knowing them. I am sure that none of us will ever forget Tiny Tim, that we will remember how patient and mild he was, although he was a little child. We will not quarrel easily amongst ourselves and forget Tiny Tim in doing it." "No, never, father," the Cratchit children replied. "I am happy," said Bob. "I am very happy." Mrs. Cratchit kissed him. His daughters kissed him. The two young Cratchits kissed him, and Peter wrapped his arms around his father's neck. "Spectre," said Scrooge, his eyes never leaving the mournful family scene before him. "Something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me,
What man was that whom we saw lying dead?"
With that, the ghost again raised its cloak like the raven-black wings of a bird, transitioning the world around them. When they were lowered, Scrooge found himself once again on the busy city streets.
"This court is where my place of occupation is,"
said Scrooge, seeing his office from where they stood.
"Let me behold what I shall be in days to come."
But the spirit stopped, and the hand was pointed elsewhere.
"My counting house is yonder," Scrooge exclaimed. "Why do you point away?"
The inexorable finger underwent no change. Scrooge hastened to the window of his office and looked in. It was an office still, but not his. The furniture was not the same, and the figure in the chair was not himself. The phantom pointed as before. He rejoined the spirit, and wondering where his future self might be if his business was no longer his own, accompanied it until they reached an iron gate. He paused and looked around before entering. A churchyard. Here, then, the wretched unknown man lay beneath the ground. It was a worthy place, walled in by houses, overrun by grass and weeds, the growth of vegetation's death, not life, choked up with too much burying, fat with repleted appetite. A worthy place. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. Scrooge advanced toward it, trembling. The phantom was exactly as it always had been, but he dreaded that he saw a new meaning in its solemn shape.
"Before I draw any nearer to that stone to which you point," said Scrooge, "answer me one question. Are these the shadows of things that will be, or the shadows of things that may be only?"
Still, the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood.
"Men's courses will surely foreshadow certain ends," said Scrooge, "but if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Yes? Say it is thus with what you show me."
The spirit was immovable as ever, its unseen eyes boring holes into Scrooge as he crept towards it. Trembling as he went, he followed the specter's finger where it pointed to a small, insignificant headstone, marking a neglected, overrun grave. Emblazoned on the stone, it read, Ebenezer Scrooge.
"Am I the man who lay upon that bed?"
he cried, falling to his knees. The finger pointed from the grave to him and back again.
"Oh, no, spirit! Oh, no, no!"
The finger still was there, pointing at his name.
"Spirit!"
he cried, tight clutching at its robes.
Hear me, hear me, hear me! I am not the man that I was. I will not be the man I must have been but for this night. Why show me this, if I am past all hope?"
For the first time, the spirit's hand appeared to shake.
"Good spirit,"
he pursued, falling to the ground, prostrating at the spirit's foot.
"Your nature intercedes for me, and it pities me. Assure me that I may yet change these shadows you have shown me, that I may live an altered life."
The specter's hand trembled.
"I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past and the present and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, please, please, please tell me that I may sponge away the writing on this stone."
In his agony, he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but he was strong in his entreaty and detained it. The spirit, stronger yet, wrenched free of him, and Scrooge felt himself falling backward. Section 5. Christmas Day. Scrooge's eyes opened slowly, finding his hands clasping not onto the steely hand of his grave phantom, but a tall, wooden bedpost. A bedpost? Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all the time before him was his own. Time enough to make amends.
I will live in the past, the present, and the future, Scrooge repeated as he scrambled out of bed. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Oh, Jacob Marley, heaven and Christmas be praised for this. I say it on my knees, old Jacob, on my knees. He was so fluttered and so glowing with his good intentions that his broken voice would scarcely answer to his call. He had been sobbing violently in his conflict with the spirit, and his face was wet with tears. They are not torn down, rings and all. They are here. I am here. The shadows of the things that would have been may be dispelled. They will be. I know they will. His hands were busy with his garments all this time, turning them inside out, putting them on upside down, tearing them, mislaying them, making them parties to every kind of extravagance. I don't know what to do, cried Scrooge, laughing and crying in the same breath. I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. I'm as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody. A Happy New Year to the whole world. He had frisked into the sitting room and was now standing there, perfectly winded. Oh, there's the saucepan that the gruel was in, cried Scrooge, starting off again and going round the fireplace. Oh, there's the door by which the ghost of Jacob Marley entered. Oh, there's the corner where the ghost of Christmas Present sat. Oh, there's the window where I saw the wandering spirits. It's all right. It's all true. It all happened. Scrooge laughed deeply, and for a man who had been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh, a most illustrious laugh, the father of a long, long line of brilliant laughs. I don't know what day of the month it is, said Scrooge. I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. I don't know anything at all. At that moment, the bells of a nearby church brought him back to his senses, their glorious ringing peals echoing across the rooftops, announcing the hour. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist. Clear, bright, jovial, stirring cold piping for the blood to dance in. Golden sunlight, heavenly sky, sweet fresh air, merry bells. Oh, glorious, glorious. You there, boy, what's today? Cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in his Sunday clothes, who had stopped to stare at the crazy old man grinning from ear to ear at his window. Huh? Returned the boy with all his might of wonder. What's today, my fine fellow? Said Scrooge. Today? Replied the boy. Why, it's Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day, said Scrooge to himself. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. Oh, they can do anything they like. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow. Hello, returned the boy. Do you know the poulterers in the next street over, at the corner? Scrooge inquired. I should hope I did, replied the lad. An intelligent boy, said Scrooge. A remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Not the little one, but the big one. What, the one as big as me? Returned the boy. What a delightful boy, said Scrooge. A pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck. That's hanging there now, replied the boy. Is it? Said Scrooge. Go and buy it. What? Exclaimed the boy. No, I am in earnest, said Scrooge. Go and buy it, and tell them to bring it here, that I may give them the direction where to take it. Come back with the man, and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes, and I'll give you half a crown. The boy was off like a shot. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's, whispered Scrooge, rubbing his hands and splitting with a laugh. He won't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. Oh, wonderful! What a wonderful surprise this will be. The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did somehow, and went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming poulterer's man. As he stood there, waiting for his arrival, the knocker caught his eye. Oh, I shall love it as long as I live,
cried Scrooge, patting it with his hands.
I scarcely ever looked at it before. What an honest expression it has on its face. It's a wonderful knocker. Oh, here's the turkey. How are you? Merry Christmas.
It was a turkey, large, powerful, and round. That bird never could have stood upon his legs. He would have snapped them off short in a minute, like sticks of sealing wax.
Why, it's impossible to carry that all the way to Camden Town,
said Scrooge, marveling at its size and weight.
You must have a cab.
The chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle for which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle for which he recompensed the boy, were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again, and chuckled until he cried. He dressed himself all in his best and at last got out into the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present, and walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded every one with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant that 3 or 4 good-humored fellows said, "Good morning, sir. A Merry Christmas to you." And Scrooge said often afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he had ever heard, those were the blithest in his ears. He had not gone far when he saw the portly gentleman who had walked into his counting-house the day before, the very one who had said, "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe?" and asked for Scrooge's charity in providing food and shelter for the poor this Christmas season. The very one Scrooge had turned away in anger. It sent a pang across his heart to think how this old gentleman would look upon him when they met, but he knew what path lay straight before him, and he took it.
"My dear sir,"
said Scrooge, quickening his pace and taking the old gentleman by both his hands.
"How do you do? I hope that you succeeded yesterday. It was very kind of you. A Merry Christmas to you, sir."
"Mr. Scrooge?"
"Yes," said Scrooge. "That is my name, and I fear that it may not be pleasant to you. Allow me to ask your pardon, and will you have the goodness—"
Here Scrooge whispered in his ear.
"Lord bless me!"
cried the gentleman, as if his breath had been taken away. "My dear Mr. Scrooge, are you serious?"
"If you please," said Scrooge. "And not a farthing less. A great many back payments are included in it, I assure you. Will you do me that favor?"
"My dear sir," said the man, shaking hands with him, I don't know what to say."
"Don't say anything, please," retorted Scrooge. "Come and see me. Will you come and see me?"
"I will," cried the old gentleman, and it was clear that he meant to do it.
"Thank you," said Scrooge. "I am much obliged to you. I thank you 50 times. Bless you."
He went to church and walked about the streets. He watched the people hurrying to and fro and patted children on the head. He looked down into the kitchens of houses and up into the windows and found that everything could yield him pleasure. He had never dreamed that any walk, or anything for that matter, could give him so much happiness. In the afternoon, he turned his steps toward his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times, each time certain it would be the one that he knocked. But with each passing, his courage failed him, and he simply walked back to the end of the block again. Back and forth he went like a madman before he finally summoned the courage to go up and knock. Making an absolute dash at the door, lest the spirit of the moment fail him again, he rapped firmly 3 times. The door was answered by a young maid.
"Is your master at home, my dear?"
said Scrooge to the girl. "Yes, sir."
"Where is he, my love?"
said Scrooge. "Oh, he's in the dining room, sir, along with the mistress. I'll show you upstairs if you'd like."
"Thank you, but he knows me,"
said Scrooge, with his hand already on the dining room lock.
"I'll go in here, my dear."
He turned it gently and sidled his face in round the door. There was his young nephew and niece, their faces turned down to the table in front of them, laid heavily for the dinner they would soon be serving their friends and neighbors. Quietly they muttered to one another, inspecting the meal and ensuring every dish was properly set out, each detail thought of in advance.
"Fred!"
said Scrooge. Dear heart alive, how they both nearly leapt out of their skin at the sound of Scrooge's voice. Turning quickly to the door, their eyes widened at the face smiling back at them. What phantom haunted their doorway this Christmas day? Its grinning face was unfamiliar to their eyes and caused the poor young woman's heart to skip a beat. "Why, bless my soul!" cried Fred. "Who's that?"
"It's your Uncle Scrooge,"
cried the old man.
"I've come to dinner. And I'm afraid to make amends for a great many dinners missed." I am sorry, Fred. Will you let me accept your offer still? Will you let me in to dine with you?
Let him in. It's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could have been heartier. His niece looked just the same as she had when he visited with the spirit some impossibly long Christmases ago. Their party guests were the same, the games were the same, everything played out exactly as it had with the ghost, save for one difference. Dear Uncle Scrooge in the middle of every bit of it. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful company, wonderful happiness. A night so long and filled with joy Scrooge had never known. But he was early at the office the next morning. Oh, he was early. If only he could be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late. That was the thing he had set his heart upon. And he did it. Yes, he did. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1:15. No Bob. He was a full 18.5 minutes behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open so that he might catch his clerk entering. Before the door was even open, Bob's hat was off, his scarf as well. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake the clock itself. "Hello," growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice, or as near as he could feign it. "What do you mean coming here by this time of day?" "I am very sorry, sir," said Bob. "I am behind my time." "You are?" repeated Scrooge. "Yes, I think you are. Step this way, sir, if you please." "It's only once a year, sir," pleaded Bob, appearing from his chamber. "It won't be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir." "And I'll tell you what, my friend," said Scrooge, "I am not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer. And therefore," he continued, leaping from his stool and giving Bob such a dig in the waistcoat that he staggered back into the small stove, his hand knocking over the fire iron. It fell to the floor with a great clang, filling the silence between them. "And therefore, I am about to raise your salary." Bob trembled, his eyes darting to the iron. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding him and calling to the people in the court for help in a straitjacket. His hand quickly closed around it, and he held it up to ward off this old man, as if he had transformed into some wild, dangerous animal, ready to pounce on the poor, unsuspecting Mr. Cratchit. "Oh, Merry Christmas, Bob!" said Scrooge, with an earnestness that could not be mistaken, as he clapped him on the back, laughing deeply. "A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family. We will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Make up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit." Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. To his nephew, he became the uncle he should have been for all the young man's life, honoring the memory of his beloved sister. To his community, he became known as a benevolent figure, whose spirit and love for those who surrounded him rivaled only Father Christmas himself. To his clerk, he became a fair and kind master. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh, and little heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good at which some people did not have their fill of laughter. Knowing that people such as these would be blind anyway, he thought it quite as well that they should wrinkle their eyes up in grins. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He never again saw the spirits, nor did Jacob Marley ever haunt his halls and doorways. Aside from the alteration of life he experienced that fateful night, the only shadow of his ghostly tale was a solemn nod he made to each brother of the ghost of Christmas present as the new year brought them together. Though he could not see them, he knew them to be nearby. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that truly be said of us, and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, every one. You made it all the way to the end. Congratulations, and thank you so much for watching. I hope that you'll take this opportunity to give my channel a like and a subscribe. There's no obligation, of course, but I'd appreciate whatever engagement you can give. A big thanks goes to my partner who helped to edit the audio for this video. It would not have happened without him, and I am extremely thankful. You can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, Ravelry, Substack, and Patreon by searching Flannel and Pearls or clicking the links below. A massive holiday thanks go to my Patreon subscribers for their patience as I worked my way through this video. Those of you who have been following for a while know that I have never produced something on this scale before, and I appreciate your support as I worked through the logistics. For ad-free videos, curated episode playlists, and more casual content like Fiber Troll Fridays, head on over to Flannel and Pearls at patreon.com. Subscription starts as low as $5 a month and grants you access to my full back catalog of episodes, ad-free. Take care of yourselves this holiday season, my friends. I'll see you next time.